Last but not least, artificial intelligence is changing every industry. So what does it mean for agriculture? Our final speaker, James Buzzard, is a partner CTO at Microsoft ANZ, working with agriculture and agri-tech companies to integrate AI into farming operations. With a background in neuroscience, tech strategy, and even professional cooking, James brings a unique perspective into how AI can transform data, decision-making, and efficiency in agriculture. Everyone, please welcome James Buzzard with the latest about AI in agriculture.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And it's absolutely amazing to be here. I realise now that I've actually done a little bit of a boo-boo. I've said AI in a room where AI means something completely different, which is a mistake that hasn't been a recent one of mine. So in the context of today, for me, AI is artificial intelligence. But it was funny, I drove up from Melbourne today, and I recall that when I was in high school, my very first work experience job was going and joining my brother, who was doing a PhD in cell biology at Monash University, and I got to actually do the other AI. I got to do artificial insemination. I worked with him at the Centre for Cell Biology at Monash University for a couple of weeks, and got to get a little bovine ovum and artificially inseminate that in a lab condition. So it's funny how these things come around. But AI in the context of artificial intelligence is going through a massive revolution, and I'm sure you're all very much aware of that. I'm sure everybody here has heard of ChatGPT, people are hearing about DeepSeek, etc., etc. But realistically, what does that mean for you on a day-to-day basis in your role, in your farm, and in your livelihood? So I want to talk about the AI revolution. And artificial intelligence is not just about this thing called ChatGPT. It's actually been around for a long period of time. And to use a lovely old meme, it doesn't necessarily mean the thing you think it means. Artificial intelligence has actually been around since 1956, and it has formed different things at different times, and you've no doubt been using artificial intelligence in some way, shape or form for quite some time. I'm sure every single person in this room has a smartphone. There may be a couple of people who are very proud that they still have a flip phone, but if you have a smartphone or you have any modern computing device, that has some form of AI in it. However, that would be what we call more traditional AI, which probably isn't the right nomenclature, because traditional AI means something that existed just before generative AI. But what we have seen is this move from traditional AI, which is a very fixed process, whether it be image recognition or similar, through to what's called machine learning, deep learning, and then this massive paradigm shift, which is generative AI. Now, what I really want to talk about today is where generative AI can start helping you in your businesses, livestock, and the wellness and livelihood of those businesses. Classic AI has some very traditional use cases, whether it be classification, object detection, object tracking, and those use cases have been well defined for the past 20 to 25 years. We've seen Siri and Google Assistant and Alexa do voice recognition for a very long period of time. That is a form of classic AI and is very well established. Where we're seeing generative AI really transform things is the accessibility that we have in terms of how people can approach novel problems with AI. One of the sort of interesting problems that we see in AI is when it comes to image recognition for things that look a bit weird. This is one of those things that looks a bit weird. Chihuahua or cupcake? And most AI models have a really hard time detecting between a chihuahua or a cupcake. And I'm sure you can see why. But it's because the way that AI works is it uses a monumental amount of history of information to try to determine what that particular thing is. And when two things have a lot of similarity, it gets confused. Whereas generative AI, it actually learns over time. And what I mean by learning over time is it self-reinforces. So the output of its information reinforces itself to better enhance its productivity. Now that might sound a bit weird and you might go, well, that sounds crazy, but the most advanced science sometimes sounds like magic, and I promise you that this stuff can seem like magic even for those of us who work in it. The generative AI models that we've got now make these sort of tasks much, much easier. And in a few minutes, I'll show you some of the ways that we're using this in areas far more relevant to yourselves. We talked briefly about traditional classic AI. I want to talk to you about how generative AI works. Now, ChatGPT was the most well-known implementation of generative AI, and I want to talk about that term GPT. That stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, or General Pre-trained Transformer. So that's what sits in the middle here, and that's the particular thing about generative AI that makes it different. Because instead of needing to set a very defined pathway for AI in the generative world, a GPT allows you to do a number of different things over time. So you can utilize GPT models for any number of different ideation processes, etc. I, being a complete computer nerd, might go, okay, well, AI being successful in this world, that might play a chess game and beat a human, or it might pass the Turing test, if you know what that is. But because we now have democratic access to AI, people have gone out and created the Pope in Balenciaga, or the most weird and wonderful versions of Star Wars, and stuff that just would not be in my domain of expertise or thought patterns. But because of how accessible AI is now, we're seeing this utilisation, which brings about a really interesting use case for you. I was not able to join for the entirety of this conference, but I was lucky enough to hear the last couple of sessions, and I hear about issues around retention of staff or retention of talent in this field. Being able to utilise generative AI in particular business areas is absolutely critical around having expertise in those business areas, if that makes sense. I'll use the following examples. There's 4 big use cases that we've done with Microsoft, at Microsoft with generative AI recently that might come across your radar in some way, shape or form. Now, might be a controversial question, but anyone heard of Abby Chatfield? Yeah. So we worked with one of my partners, Insight, worked with Abby Chatfield to develop a generative AI chatbot in Northern Territory for tourism. And it basically acts and answers in the style of Abby Chatfield. So that chatbot will, and I don't know her style very well, but it will act and apparently say, hey, Darl, and all that sort of jazz. So that was very much the characteristic that particular campaign wanted to go about. Similarly, we've got EduChat, which is a capability that allows teachers and students to utilise a generative AI capability to further their education or to enhance and reduce teacher workload. One of those is very close to my heart, as my wife's a teacher and I know how hard they work. I know how hard you guys work. We've got a version of this generative AI capability where a series of executives within a movie theatre chain can get a morning podcast that is dynamically developed each and every morning so that they can hear the latest on what's going across their entire ecosystem. And similarly, generative AI is now helping significantly with banking fraud. So what does that actually mean for you guys? I want to show you an example of not generative AI, but AI in general, and I think one of the vendors down here uses a similar product, but this is an example of where AI is being used today in a farming context.
Emergency animal diseases present a real threat to Australia's red meat and wool industries. Biosecurity planning and regular inspection of your animals is essential. Recognising symptoms early can make all the difference in reducing the impact of an outbreak. So how do we help producers feel confident identifying signs of exotic disease in their sheep? The Department of Primary Industries and Regions has partnered with Animal Health Australia to develop an innovative tool to educate farmers on what to look for. The Sheep Emergency Animal Disease app uses augmented reality to project a digital flock of sheep integrated with the user's real-life surroundings. Using the HoloLens headset, you can inspect the flock and select the sick sheep. Identifying the signs of disease is made easy using hints that pop up in real time. The app can also be used on a mobile phone or tablet without a headset. The Department of Primary Industries and Regions and Animal Health Australia, innovating the way we think about educating producers on emergency animal disease preparedness.
Has anyone in the room used that product or a similar product? So that's now about 2 to 3 years old and is just enhancing continuously. Similarly, we've now got the capability of actually monitoring animals in real time for signs of mange or signs of other capabilities. Now, I'm the first person to say I'm not an expert in this space, so I cannot give you the detail of the processes behind this, but I can talk to it at a high level. So realistically, what we're trying to do is provide you with tools by which technology can support you in your day-to-day livestock management, farm management, etc. And when it comes to how we can potentially enhance the future of workers in this space, finding different pathways for workers to enter this community might include a pathway that is how do we involve AI and technology in this field. And the only way that they can actually do that well is by being exposed intimately to the processes of your farm lives and livestock management. So realistically, it comes to this precision livestock opportunity. How can we ensure that we improve sustainability, improve yield, reduce cost, and ultimately feed the world or provide product to the world? There are a number of different opportunities for AI in livestock management, and they can take all sorts of different forms, whether it be AI tracking of livestock themselves through to enhancement of farm equipment, through to livestock nutrition and supply, etc., etc., etc. But oftentimes, the last thing you want is yet another interface. You don't want to have to sit in front of a computer and try to battle your way through something else. So where generative AI can really help is by providing this capability of a farm copilot. Now, copilot is Microsoft's term for anything we do with a generative AI interface for you. And the thing about a copilot is that it will allow you to use natural language to speak to your data. So whether you have field sensors, animal sensors, drones, etc., satellite imagery, which we do provide as a service, how can you use these services and consume these services in a way that is most easy for you? Now, this might seem a little bit far-fetched, but it's actually achievable today. There's been a number of different talks earlier in this conference around different agricultural data sources and artificial insemination data, spermatozoa data, etc. All of those things can be very difficult to analyse unless you are a specialist in those areas. But this is where generative AI can help you. It can bridge that divide, and you can use natural language to ask questions of it. I'll use myself as an example. Copilot, I used to work with Microsoft Excel years ago. I don't anymore. Every now and then I need to go into it. I did an MBA 15 years ago or something. I knew enough about P&L, all that sort of stuff then. It's not something I deal with day to day. Whenever I have to face a massive P&L these days, I just don't know how to actually deal with it. The advantage of Copilot is that I don't need to. I can now use Copilot to do the heavy lifting for me. So I can ask the questions I need without necessarily needing to understand the nuance of things like formulas and, for want of a better term in the artificial insemination world, genomics, etc., etc. Now, we already have a product at Microsoft that kind of fits this bill called FarmBeats. And FarmBeats is already in use in agricultural situations worldwide. And I want to show you a little bit of how that particular product works in a farm in, I think it's California, so I'll just go to that now.
This area is known as Stewart's Landing, and this is Dancing Crow Farm.
One of the world's problems is yield. How do you double the yield by 2050 to feed the growth of the population in the world? This is a project that we recently started. What we want to do is we want to enable data-driven farming. The first goal is to give a real-time view of the farm, real-time pulse of the farm to the farmer, saying, hey, this is what your farm is doing right now. So how do you even connect these farms to the internet? It's so far remote, the cell carriers have very little incentive to provide connectivity in the farms.
The system that we have deployed here is measuring soil temperature and moisture, and it's coming from this sensor.
Here what you see is a white spaces device. The idea that we had was a farmer buys a white space router, plug it in the farm, and your entire farm is connected. Now you can connect multiple devices, and connectivity is cheap. So you can actually deploy many more sensors in the farm. You could have a dense deployment of sensors getting real-time view of all the parts of the farm. Not only your soil or moisture data, but this is a high bandwidth connection. You can connect cameras, get real-time views from the farm. So once you have all this data, you could then analyze the data to predict what the future would look like.
I'm actually really looking forward to how the process will change. This last year has been mainly a data gathering, information collecting year for the Microsoft research team. I'm really looking forward to seeing what research they've gathered this year, putting that together with what I think is going to happen next year, and make predictions for what I should plant when and where.
So that's FarmBeats, and that's been around for a number of years now, and that's an aggregation platform for different data sources around a farm environment. And what we're talking about in terms of the farm co-pilot concept is the way of interfacing with that aggregation platform. But it's not just capabilities like that. Who here has had to go through a livestock audit? Yep. It's now, once again, I don't have to do it. I have got friends who have had to do it. It's apparently a very painful process. Now, there is an organisation in New Zealand who has started using drones to do real-time livestock counts. And it's taken the time for doing livestock audits down from multiple days of moving and herding and mustering down to hours. Because the drone can basically go up to a height and using computer vision do real-time counting. And the advantage is the accuracy of that count is far, far higher than humans. So we're getting, on the initial pilot phases, accuracies of 97%, and in the production phases, accuracy is higher than that. This was going to be a stage where I did a demo, which I can't actually do, but I did want to give you an opportunity to actually see Copilot in action. So I want to encourage you all to actually grab your phones, grab a laptop if you feel like it, and go to copilot.microsoft.com on any website and just have a play. I wouldn't put any confidential data in it at the moment because the public version of that, we don't provide commercial data guarantees. But if you have a Microsoft account and you sign in, no matter which Microsoft account you have, we provide commercial data guarantees. So that means that if you have a Microsoft business account or you have a Microsoft personal account of a certain level, any data you put in there will be commercial in confidence. It's also completely secure. It's got the same security standards as the rest of the Microsoft platform. But just ask it some questions. I was actually trying to work out a few days ago, hey, how can I best demo Copilot to this conference I've got coming up? And it gave me a whole pile of different answers. I wanted to see whether it could connect to some data sources that were relevant, whether it be genome repositories. Just have a play. That's honestly the easiest way of learning about this technology. Another capability which is quite interesting. Imagine being able to talk to your plants. Seems really out there, but a project called Project Florence at Microsoft, which is one of our real stretch projects, is trying to do just that. And the way it's trying to do that is by using a number of sensors within an isolated environment around a single plant, and then one of those natural language processing interfaces, Copilot interfaces, to allow people to actually understand what's going on. Those sensors will include oxygen sensors, CO2 sensors, moisture sensors, etc., etc. It sounds completely wacky, but if you'd told me 20 years ago that I would have been talking about the Pope in Balenciaga on stage for Microsoft, I probably would have laughed as well. So these are all things that are absolutely cutting edge. Beyond that, Project Premonition. This is a solution that essentially sets up a microbiome in a lab. And what I mean by that is it allows us to rapidly test virus and bacteria and pathogen development in a very isolated environment using artificial intelligence. We're hoping that this will allow us to understand where things like the next COVID might come from, the next Ebola, and how we might be able to address that. We already know that generative AI has helped with COVID vaccine enhancement, and that ability for AI in general to really rapidly enhance vaccine and medical development has been huge. This has an effect in your community as well, because it allows vaccine and medical enhancement development to rapidly reducing costs. So how can we better service the livestock industry with these sort of capabilities? Now, because I didn't get a chance to do a demo, I'm running a bit ahead of time, but it does mean we've got plenty of time for questions. But I did want to thank you very much for the opportunity to chat today, but open the floor up for any questions.
Great. Everyone put their hands together for James Buzzard. Thank you so much. So yes, as James says, we do have time for quite a few questions. We have one in the audience over here. Could we please get a microphone to this gentleman in the front? Microphones.
That's all right. Whilst that's coming, I'll answer the one on the chat, if that's here.
No problem. So Steph online says, how does Copilot differ from ChatGPT?
Sure. So ChatGPT is a product released by OpenAI. Microsoft has a 49% stake in OpenAI, and ChatGPT is based off a large language model that varies over time, but it's currently called GPT-4o, although it's very quickly changing to 4.5. Copilot is Microsoft's equivalent, and Copilot is based off a similar large language model behind the scenes. But Microsoft is a separate entity to OpenAI, and we vary the way that we utilise those large language models. That's Copilot as a general. Now, for want of getting myself in trouble, and I know I'm going to be recorded here, we've confused ourselves by calling everything Copilot. So we've got Copilot itself. We've then got Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is the version that integrates with all your data. Then we have Copilot for sales, Copilot for service, Copilot for dynamics, Copilot for this, Copilot for that, which makes it very confusing to absolutely define that question. But essentially, the easiest way of understanding it is Copilot is Microsoft's equivalent of ChatGPT, and it has very, very strong security controls per Microsoft's security posture around our environment.
Okay.
This gentleman up here.
Lyndon Cleggett. I come from down near Mount Gambier, South Australia. Some of this stuff you put up today is just mind-boggling and just blowing my mind away. And I get a bit concerned though. I watch the youth of the world. If they don't know something, they Google it. But they always believe it. They don't question it. I always question it. Anyway, Anthony's looked up to say AI and Brookley Guernseys, which is what I am. Apparently I've moved to West Australia.
Look, I think I hear you. I think there's a good level of cynicism that needs to be in place around some of this stuff. I'll use DeepSeek as the example. Has everybody heard of DeepSeek? So to give some context, DeepSeek was released in early January this year as a competing model to OpenAI's models out of China. Now, the reason why it really revolutionised the landscape was that supposedly it was much, much cheaper to develop, and we're talking $10 million as opposed to $50 billion than the OpenAI model, and much cheaper to run. The ultimate concern with it is that when you asked it about Tiananmen Square, it said didn't happen. When you ask it about Taiwan, it said it should be China's. Things of that nature. And I'll use that just as an example, and that's my personal position, that's not Microsoft's position. I need to be very clear on that. Further to that, and probably more scarily, about 2 weeks after that was released, it was discovered that every single query ever asked of that product was freely available on the internet because it was unsecured in the back end. So, to your point, we need to be very mindful of the trust placed in the companies behind these products. And the reason why we term our product Copilot is because it shouldn't be an autopilot, it should be a copilot. It needs to enhance things for you. And one of the particular nuances of Copilot in the Microsoft context is its referenceability. So when it gives you information, it will show you the source of that information. And if you ask it to justify its answers, it will do so. So it's really important to understand, and this is getting a little bit more complex than I really wanted to go, but there's a concept called prompt engineering in generative AI. What that basically means is, how the hell do we talk to this thing? So how do we make sure that we talk to this thing in a way that gets the best answers for us out of it? Including making sure that we understand that there's a bit of give and take. It's getting better on a day-to-day basis. But similarly, if we know that it is relying on data sources from our farm and data sources from authoritative locations, such as NHMRC, etc., whether that's the right location for you guys, apologies if it's not, then, and it references all of those sources and we can actually follow the bouncing ball back, then it allows us to have more trust in it. Does that answer your question? Great.
Cool.
What could be the next generation, like deep learning introduced in 2017, then 2022 generative AI? What's the next?
So OpenAI has announced that GPT-5 is coming. It's just released GPT 4.5 as a research preview, which is kind of a conglomeration of a number of different things. I think what we're just seeing is enhancements of this base capability. It would be very hard to predict what the next big bang is. A lot of people would say what's called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, but I personally don't believe that that will actually be a reality. I think what we'll see is that GPT models will get to a stage where they will seem so intelligent due to the depth of knowledge that they might mimic that artificial general intelligence, but it will just be a really neat trick. The biggest advantage and revolution that we're seeing right now is what's called agents in generative AI, which essentially means the ability to set up little instances of generative AI to go and do things for you. So maybe that can be something that periodically in a farm context goes, okay, well, I'll monitor the water, I'll make sure that the pH is right, I'll make sure that the chemical composition is right, etc., and I'll do that every 24 hours and I'll report on an exceptions basis. Or a video camera feed monitoring for a variation to normality on an exceptions basis. And there's a lot of history in other arenas of us doing that. I think that is where we'll see these incremental changes, but in terms of the next massive revolutionary change, we're going at such a pace now that what we see in the next year or 2 years will seem so different from now anyway that it'll feel like a generational change, in my opinion.
Louise Sunderman, Dairy Australia. Just coming back to some of your presentation, and I suppose looking for a bit of clarification or your thoughts on this, so dairy farms produce so much data, like it's coming out our ears.
Yep.
We've got a few issues with that. One is data quality going in, and then another element is the environment in which we can integrate with that. So we've got all of these different data sources coming in, and you were, I think, saying that we could potentially use the Microsoft environments to help aggregate those data and get things that are more meaningful out of that. Is it something that Microsoft would be, here we go, dairy farmers, this is something that we've got that you would then have to develop your own sort of ways of plugging it in? Or is there roles for new businesses to come in, use the Microsoft tools that then could be employed by, essentially selling a service to dairy farmers to help aggregate these data from different data sources?
Sure. It'll 100% be what we call our partner business. My role at Microsoft is what we call a partner CTO. So I work with our partner ecosystem. Now, to give you a brief concept of what that might be, it's very rare that you buy a Microsoft product directly from Microsoft. You will often buy it from JB Hi-Fi or Officeworks or something like that. Now, they are what we term our partners. Similarly, when a business implements a Microsoft product for themselves, it won't be Microsoft working directly with them. Microsoft builds the products. Organizations like partners will implement those products. So the vendors back here, I don't know whether they do use Microsoft. I'm hoping you do. But more than likely, they will have built on top of the Microsoft platform. Microsoft builds for the majority and then allows that to then be utilised for customisation or configuration. We know that, for example, with FarmBeats, that we had a big enough problem statement that there was a platform that could be built. There are a myriad of partners that plug into that platform, whether it be the sheep counting capability that plugs into that platform and utilises our Azure computer vision technology in the back end, or utilises other capabilities further down the stack. So 100% there needs to be businesses in the way. We also support all of those businesses, so we have a lot of funding for startups in this space, and we want to support businesses. We have a very strong goal around sustainability, and anything we can do to support businesses in this sector, we will do. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Oh, and sorry, in terms of the dairy data can become a swamp very quickly. Part of the benefit of generative AI is that we've got enough power now to churn through it very quickly as well and determine what is worth keeping versus what is not, versus what can be processed and actually cognated through in real time.
I am very selfishly interested in this question online.
Sure.
I wonder if you could answer it. So Rachel asks, recruiting is becoming more difficult as applicants use this technology to write CVs and cover letters. Any tips on how to understand what's real and what's not?
That's a huge problem. Huge problem. We're seeing, we joke often at Microsoft about the idea of AI applicants interviewing with AI recruiters, which is just being ridiculous. Microsoft is possibly, in technology terms, one of the most desirable places to work at the moment. I'm lucky that I pipped the post and got in just before the generative AI revolution. I doubt they'd hire me now. But for every job that we advertise, we get something like 6,000 or 7,000 applicants, which is virtually impossible to go through. I'll answer this question in two parts. We're seeing recruitment change in that we're now seeing recruiters come to organisations, whether it be technology organisations or other organisations, with pre-qualified candidates. So it's flipped the model. So a candidate who's looking for a role will be pre-qualified, screened, ready to go, and that recruiter will then fish that candidate out to potential organisations, going, hey, this person, we've made sure they're verified, qualified, etc., etc. What do you think? Then what we're also seeing is a complete revolution in the way that automated processing in recruitment is occurring. So gone are the days where 80% of CVs are shot off because of the automated CV processing. You're now seeing a lot of requirements for candidates to actually respond and do a lot of activity before they even get to a qualification stage. And that's to weed out a lot of people. Now, as AI gets more advanced, I think we'll just see that unfortunately go up. It certainly is intimidating for anybody who is looking for roles, especially early in career roles. And one of the ways that we're approaching that differently is we're also, at Microsoft at least, and in collaboration with a number of different organisations, we're reducing the requirements for entry. So we're now making sure that we have alternative pathways into Microsoft, and we are committed. I don't have the dates off the top of my head, but we're committed to something like 20% of our workforce having alternative career entries by something like 2030 in Australia. And what I mean by that, people who have done certificates, not graduate degrees, people who have done mature-aged stuff, etc., etc. I myself was a mature-aged grad in a previous life, so I very acutely agree with that as a potential pathway.
Cool. Okay, well, that's all we have time for the moment, but thank you so much for a very interesting presentation.
No, at all.
Thank you, James Buzzard.
Thanks, everybody.